Great question I received from an athlete, and the question is a common one that I usually get is what's the deal with genetic testing, genetic and genomic testing? So genetic testing has been really interesting. It's been in the limelight for quite a while. It's gotten kind of a little bit bad rap because of the whole 23andMe thing, but let me break this down a little bit. So genetic testing, what I'm not going to talk about is like the 23andMe, like origin, heritage, ethnicity, all that stuff, right? Hair color, all that stuff. That is genetic testing, but it's not in relation to what we do with nutrition. That's not as important as what I'm going to be talking about next. So this next thing, when we talk about genetic testing in terms of nutrition, we're talking about genomics, right? So it can get kind of confusing, genetics, genomics. What we want to really kind of point out and look for is when you have genetic testing in terms of nutrition, and the whole field of that actually is called nutragenomics, so nutrition and genomics. So the reason why that's important is because it's the relationship between your genes and nutrition, and specifically if your genes and some of your genes specifically have these things called SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms. It's a long way of saying, are there spelling errors on some of your genes that can be affected by nutrition that affect your health, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at when we talk about nutrigenomics or genetic testing for nutrition, not talking about hair color, eye color, all that stuff. So is it beneficial? 100%. The beauty of this test or these types of tests is they are one and done. You do it once, your genes don't change. The environment in which your genes change, but your genes don't change. So you only have to have that test done once. So economically, it makes a lot of sense, right? It's a few $100s, do it once in your lifetime, boom, you have a lot of information to work with. The other thing is, well, who cares? So what, right? So you get this test done, what is it going to give me, right? So what it gives you, and certain health practitioners will come at it from different angles, but I love doing genetic testing on individuals and to help shape their nutrition plan. So here's what I mean by this. Depending on the avenue of genetic testing and the company that is providing that testing, you will get different data points. And when I mean data points, I mean like interpretation, right? So all these companies are usually studying or they're usually measuring the same genes. It's just the interpretation of it is a lot different from company to company and from health practitioner to health practitioner. So that said, let me break this down. When I'm looking at genetics for individuals in relation to nutrition, I'm looking for a couple different categories because genes do not act individually, right? They act within each other. They are responsible in a lot of different pathways. So it's not just, oh, if I have a spelling error on one gene, that means XYZ. Well, probably not because these genes are interacting with each other that are affecting different pathways in your body, whether it's cognitive functioning, inflammation, methylation, cardiovascular health, you name it, right? They're all kind of playing in the same sandbox, right? They all have different responsibilities, but we should never look at genes as an individual gene. We should look at it as a cluster of genes and how they're interacting on these different pathways. As an example, the key things that I like to look at when interpreting these genetic tests are inflammation. That's a huge one. So there's a group of genes that are responsible for inflammatory pathways in the body. For example, I just did a genetic test interpretation on an athlete, on a recreational trail runner, and we found that she had a lot of spelling errors on quite a few genes that interacted with the inflammatory pathways in her body. So what's the so what? Who cares to that? Well, from my perspective as a sport dietitian, I am able to craft her nutrition appropriately based on those spelling errors that are within her body. So what I can do is, while everybody should obviously follow somewhat of an anti-inflammatory diet, right? For her specifically, we knew that we needed to emphasize that 100% of the time and really help craft her daily nutrition plan and her nutrient timing plan to account for her genetic makeup or her spelling errors on her inflammatory pathway genes. Now, another one I look at is methylation. So methylation is kind of like these genes will turn on or off genes farther down the pathway that can do different things in the body. So if you are not methylating correctly, you could be at risk for other possible factors that are negatively related to your health. So these could be inflammatory, these can be joint related, they could be cognitive functioning related, right? So really looking at the scope of the genes that are also associated with methylation pathways. So interestingly enough, all of these genes also have nutrition components to them. So once we have the data and we know what's happening from pathway perspective, where the spelling errors are in different types of pathways, then we can kind of swoop in from a nutrition perspective and say, okay, based on your spelling errors on these specific genes, which are part of the cluster, remember, because genes work together, part of the cluster of methylation pathways, inflammatory pathways, and the last one I really emphasize is cognitive functioning pathways, then you or a health professional that you're working with can better craft your daily nutrition plan to account for your individual physiology based on your genetics. So where we're at these days is much more than just a, hey, let's do a 23andMe to find out my heritage, what percent Italian I am, or whatever. That's part of it, right? But the part of nutrigenomics can actually help you reshape your daily nutrition plan to support your genes, but also to support better aging and better longevity and better sport performance. Now, I just highlighted a few of the pathways that I really look at: inflammatory, methylation, and cognitive functioning, but there's a host of others that we look at in combination. Those are just the three main categories I look at with most people. And then it kind of trickles down a little bit, and I start looking at smaller pathways, if you will. So is genetic testing the real deal? It is, as long as you are using the data correctly, you are having someone interpret it correctly, and actually putting that into a nutrition and exercise plan that meets your needs that are based on your genes. So this whole DNA-based nutrition coaching, which I love doing, it's for real. It's not a joke, right? It's science. It just is a matter of finding the right person to actually take you through that process. If you'd like more information, obviously we do that at eNRG Performance. All my sport dietitians do. But hopefully this answers the question, is genetic testing important and is it worthwhile? Thanks for watching. See you on the next Ask eNRG.